The steel hum of dawn rolled across Paris Island like a cold tide, washing over barracks lined in perfect military symmetry. 4:30 a.m., and the only warmth came from the friction of discipline, the kind that broke spirits before it built soldiers. Gunnery Sergeant Alan Riker's boots struck the concrete with deliberate cruelty, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn stillness. "Up, Cole! You think this is a charity shelter?" His boot met the lower bunk where Hannah Cole lay curled beneath a thin government blanket. She rose slowly, bones aching, brown hair tangled, the same eyes that once scanned desert horizons now hollow and distant. "Yes, sir." Her voice was barely a whisper. Around her, 20 recruits stirred with a mix of pity and disgust. The rumor was she'd come from a thrift store background, Goodwill Hannah, the weak one who didn't belong. They laughed, because laughter made cruelty easier to swallow. Tank Lowell, a walking fortress of muscle, leaned down from the top bunk, smirking. "Go home, sweetheart. The Corps doesn't do charity." She shoved Hannah hard, the impact echoing on the cold floor. Riker didn't intervene, he smiled. And at the door, watching in silence, Colonel Nathan Drake observed like a man inspecting a problem he'd already solved. His eyes lingered on Hannah longer than they should have. "Cole," he said finally, voice as sharp as a blade, "today's combat evaluation. Make peace with failure. You won't last past sunrise." Outside, the air tasted of salt and diesel. The training grounds were alive with noise boots hitting gravel, orders barking through megaphones, metal against metal. Hannah's sweatpants hung loose on her frame, her sneakers worn thin from years of use. To everyone around her, she was already the weakest link, a name destined to disappear in the first elimination report. But to one man, Sergeant Daniel Cho, she was something else entirely. His clipboard hid a classified mission file, and each note he scribbled wasn't about poor performance but about patterns, balance, control, breathing. She moved wrong for a novice, too measured, too aware. The sparring pit became a theater of humiliation. Tank volunteered eagerly, cracking her knuckles, ready to prove dominance. The crowd circled tight, hungry for spectacle. "Fight back!" someone shouted when Tank's first punch landed. Hannah stumbled, folded from the blow, then did something no one saw coming. She pivoted not in panic, but precision, turning Tank's own weight into air. The larger woman fell face first into the dirt. Silence followed, broken by nervous laughter. "Lucky dodge," Riker muttered, but Drake wasn't laughing. He leaned forward, gaze hardening, as if seeing through a disguise. For a fleeting second, Hannah's posture straightened, an instinct born of training, too disciplined to forget, and the faint mark beneath her sleeve, a scar shaped like a phoenix feather, caught the morning light. Then she lowered her head again, becoming the meek recruit the world expected. Later, in the mess hall, her tray of food hit the floor courtesy of Marco Velez, the golden boy of the platoon. "Clean it up, tourist," he sneered, as instructors looked away. Hannah knelt, hands steady, movements economical, unbothered by laughter. Only Mia Santos, the small recruit from Beaufort with gentle eyes, slipped her a protein bar when no one watched. "Why do you let them?" she whispered. Hannah's answer was quiet enough to be mistaken for breath. Because sometimes, the best hunters pretend to be prey. That night, while others slept, Hannah lay awake, the hum of the ceiling fan masking the sound of her heartbeat. 3 years she had lived as a ghost. 3 years of silence, waiting for this place, this man, this moment. Outside, the tide rolled against the Carolina shore. Inside, Hannah's resolve hardened to steel. The hunt had begun. Morning fog crawled over the training fields like smoke from unseen fires, the kind that lingered after destruction. The recruits formed ragged lines, breath visible in the cold autumn air, hearts pounding with that peculiar mix of fear and adrenaline. Hannah Cole stood at the end of the row, shoulders squared despite bruises darkening beneath her uniform. Colonel Nathan Drake paced before them, his expression carved from stone. "Today," he announced, "we separate Marines from tourists." His eyes paused on Hannah, the corners of his mouth curving in satisfaction. "Some of you won't leave this ground as soldiers. Some won't leave at all." The words were meant as motivation, but they felt like prophecy. Sergeant Riker blew his whistle, sending the first pair into combat drills. Fists met flesh, Grunts echoed across the sand. When Riker called Hannah's name, the crowd stirred with anticipation. Tank Lowell stepped forward again, eager to reclaim her pride. "Ready to bleed, sweetheart?" Hannah said nothing. Her silence was her shield. They circled each other, one massive, one fragile, predator and prey. The whistle shrieked, and Tank lunged. The impact of her charge threw dust into the air, but somehow Hannah wasn't there. She pivoted on her heel, momentum flowing like water, and Tank's blow hit nothing but wind. The larger woman stumbled, spun, came again, swinging wild. The second punch connected, driving air from Hannah's lungs. But the smaller recruit didn't fall. She absorbed it, redirected it, stepping inside Tank's reach with impossible calm. A movement too fast for the untrained eye, a twist of the wrist, a shift of balance, and Tank crashed down again. Gasps rippled through the line. "That's enough," Riker barked, but Drake didn't echo him. He leaned closer, studying the strange precision of Hannah's stance. It was not luck, it was muscle memory. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition or fear, no one could tell. When the drill ended, Riker barked orders for the next round, yet Hannah felt the weight of Drake's stare like a blade against her back. He knew something. She could feel it. Later, the Crucible began the legendary obstacle course that broke bones and spirits alike. Walls, mud pits, barbed wire, rope climbs, 36 hours of exhaustion condensed into a single day. Hannah's team was the weakest on paper, 3 recruits barely keeping up, plus Mia Santos, small but unyielding. When they reached the first 12-foot wall, Riker smirked and kicked away the assistant's plank. "Do it the hard way, Cole," laughter followed. Hannah looked up at the impossible height, then took a breath and ran. Her hands found the wall, feet pushing against it in quick succession. She used the momentum to run halfway up, catching the top edge just long enough to haul herself over. The crowd went silent. She dropped down the other side in a role that belonged to special operations, not boot camp. Sergeant Cho's pen scratched something urgent onto his clipboard. The next obstacle was the rope climb. The rope swayed 30 feet above the ground, and Hannah's hands were already bleeding from earlier drills. Beside her, Tank grinned, still nursing humiliation but eager for revenge. "Need a lift, Goodwill?" she taunted, shaking the rope as Hannah climbed. The fibers tore into her palms, but she held on, inch by inch. At the top, Colonel Drake waited, too close to be coincidence. "You're bleeding on my equipment," he said quietly, voice meant only for her. Just like before, Hannah froze, the world narrowing to his words. Before, he knew. He remembered the ambush in Helmand, the convoy he rerouted to save himself while her team died. She met his eyes, and for the first time, the mask slipped. The hunted stared at the hunter. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she said softly. Drake's lips twitched. "Don't you?" He stepped back. "Let's see how long your luck lasts." As Hannah began her descent, the rope slick with blood, her foot slipped or seemed to. She fell, body twisting through air, hitting the ground with brutal force. Pain exploded through her shoulder, white and hot. Gasps echoed. "Medic!" Mia screamed, but Riker stopped her. "She's fine. Aren't you, Cole?" Hannah lay still for a heartbeat, then forced herself up. Her arm dangled uselessly. She grasped it with her other hand and, with a raw crack, shoved it back into place. The sound turned stomachs. "I don't quit, sir," she said through clenched teeth. Even Drake flinched. The rest of the course became a haze of endurance. She crawled through mud, scaled nets one-handed, balanced across beams while blood dripped into the dirt. Each obstacle tore her body but sharpened her will. By sunset, she stood at formation, covered in mud and victory, her arms swollen, her breath steady. Riker smirked. "Pathetic display. Half of you won't last a week." But Drake said nothing. His stare was cold calculation. That night, silence blanketed the barracks. Mia slipped from her bunk, pressing an ice pack into Hannah's hand. "Why do you keep taking it?" she whispered. "Because," Hannah murmured, eyes half closed. "Some battles aren't fought in daylight." Hours later, a key turned quietly in the dark. Someone moved among the bunks, their steps deliberate. Hannah didn't move, but her eyes opened, reflecting the faint light like a predator's. The game had started. And this time, the prey was watching. The metallic click of a key turning in the dark was louder than any gunshot in Hannah's mind. She lay still beneath her blanket, breathing shallow, eyes slitted just enough to catch the faint movement at the far end of the barracks. The figure was deliberate, confident, not a recruit sneaking to the restroom, but someone trained in stealth. The dim corridor light glinted off something metallic in their hand, a small ring of keys. The intruder paused at her bunk, long enough for Hannah to feel the weight of their gaze, then moved on toward the equipment lockers. Metal hinges creaked softly, the rustle of gear shifting, and then silence. After a few seconds, the door eased shut again, and the faint rhythm of boots faded down the hall. Hannah exhaled only when she heard the distant latch click. She rolled from bed soundlessly, bare feet touching cold concrete, moving like a shadow through moonlight. At the lockers, her eyes adjusted to the dimness and her stomach tightened. Her rifle lay disassembled, firing pin gone. Her armor had been sliced open in clean, professional strokes. Inside her boots, sand mixed with something sticky. Sabotage. Not the clumsy cruelty of recruits. This was surgical. Someone wanted her gone. She searched for traces, fingertips brushing along the edge of her locker, and stopped. Something cold and round pressed against her skin. A coin. She lifted it carefully into the light leaking from the hallway. Bronze, tarnished, etched with the symbol of a phoenix rising from fire, and beneath it the Roman numeral, the 7th. Her pulse quickened. Whoever did this wasn't guessing who she was. They knew. At dawn, the barracks erupted with confusion. Sergeant Riker's roar shook the walls. "Cole, what the hell did you do to your gear?" Hannah stood at attention, eyes straight ahead, her ruined equipment lined neatly on the floor like evidence in a trial. "I didn't, sir," she said. "It was fine last night." Colonel Drake appeared as if summoned, hands behind his back, calm smile carved from contempt. He picked up her body armor, tracing the clean cuts with mock concern. Thousands of dollars of taxpayer property destroyed because you couldn't take care of it. Irresponsible, wasteful, typical. "Sir," Hannah began, then stopped. Accusing anyone here without proof would only play into his hand. "No excuse, sir. I'll take responsibility." "Damn right you will," Riker snapped. "You'll work it off. If you last long enough." Laughter murmured from the back of the room. Tank smirked, Marco chuckled. Only Mia looked away, shame flickering across her face. As the group filed out, Hannah knelt to gather her equipment. Inside the boot where she'd found the coin, she slipped it back, hiding it from view. She'd seen it before years ago, in a desert half a world away, pressed into her palm by a dying teammate who whispered, "Go 7 never dies." The memory hit like shrapnel. 15 names, 15 graves, dust meridian, and one traitor who'd sold them for money. Drake had called her bleeding on my equipment. He'd remembered her blood. The realization set fire to her calm. He wasn't guessing. He was finishing what he'd started. The next morning came with strange excitement. "Live fire exercise today," Riker announced. "Real rounds, real stakes." The recruits buzzed with adrenaline. Even fear felt like pride here. But Hannah knew better. The sudden change, the unfamiliar faces among the instructors, the deviation from standard protocol, everything screamed setup. She loaded into the transport truck with her unit, Mia sitting beside her, whispering, "This isn't normal." Hannah gave a small nod. The forest outside Beaufort was dense, damp, and eerily silent. As they disembarked, Colonel Drake's presence at the front of the column raised eyebrows. Officers of his rank didn't attend live fire training. He addressed the recruits with that smooth confidence that once fooled generals. "Rules are simple," he said. "Targets will pop up, paintball rounds for most of you. But some of you," he paused, smiling faintly, "some of you will face returning fire. Motivation to shoot straight." A few nervous laughs answered him. Hannah said nothing. She scanned the tree line. Too many instructors, too much radio traffic, movement patterns all wrong. The sound of safety catches clicking off told her everything she needed to know. "Stay close," she murmured to Mia as they moved into formation. The group advanced through the woods, branches snapping underfoot. Birds fell silent. Then one sharp crack, real gunfire. The tree beside Mia exploded in splinters. "Down!" Hannah shouted, her voice suddenly commanding, clear, practiced. The recruits froze, stunned by the authority in that single word. "This isn't a drill," she yelled, pushing Mia flat. Rounds tore through the clearing. Methodical, professional, not random fire kill shots. 4 shooters, maybe 5. Their spacing was tight, overlapping fields. Whoever planned this knew tactics. Drake's voice came through a nearby radio, low and urgent. Confirm the target. I want visual confirmation before we finish. Target singular. It wasn't the recruits they were hunting. It was her. The air around her changed. Fear dissolved into cold focus. She snatched her paintball rifle, returned fire toward the muzzle flashes, marking targets in neon bursts. Move, she ordered. Log at 2 o'clock, go. The recruits scrambled, crawling under cover while Hannah provided suppression. One shooter broke from cover, repositioning, and she saw his face foreign, hired muscle, not marine. She dropped him with a non-lethal round to the chest, marking his position. For a heartbeat, the forest paused. Then Drake's voice again, louder now, unsteady. Impossible. Ghost 7 is dead. I confirmed it myself. Hannah's answer was quiet but certain, carried on the breath between gunshots. You should have checked twice. She rose from behind the fallen log, moving through trees with the grace of someone who had been forged in battle. The ghost had stopped pretending to be prey. And for the first time since Hellmand, she hunted back. Gunfire stitched the trees in ruthless lines, needles of sound threading bark and air, and Hannah moved through that storm the way a river finds its bed, no panic, only calculation. She slid from trunk to trunk, counting intervals between bursts, reading the shooters by the cadence of their magazines, marking angles in her head. Behind the fallen log, Mia Santos clutched her rifle with white knuckles. 2 terrified recruits pressed into the earth beside her, waiting for the one voice that now cut through fear like a clean blade. On my mark, Hannah called, and the calm in her tone was its own kind of armor. A muzzle flash blinked 30 yards off her left. She burst from cover, paint rounds snapping from her weapon, not to score points but to paint men. One contractor recoiled as blue, splattered his chest, swore, and ducked just long enough. Hannah closed distance in a low sprint, hit him at the hips, and drove him into loam with a shoulder that had once broken doorways. He reached for steel. She crushed his wrist with the heel of her hand, rolled, and wrenched the M4 free. The hum of real firepower in her grip felt like truth rediscovered. Ghost 7, she breathed, not as boast but as permission to stop hiding. Drake's voice crackled through a nearby radio, stripped of elegance. Confirm the target, finish it. The answer came on a staccato of live rounds as Hannah stitched the base of a pine to pin a second shooter. You missed your chance 3 years ago, she said, words meant for no one and for him alone. Another weapon barked from the flank. She pivoted, fired 2 tight bursts into the dirt at the attacker's feet, forcing a stumble. Move! Log to gully, she ordered her team, and they scuttled in a ragged line, alive because someone had finally given them a plan. The forest tried to swallow the chaos. Hannah refused to let it. She skimmed along deadfall, swapping magazines, every movement compact, economical, something learned in deserts and cities where failure meant funerals. A contractor edged wide to flank the gully. She rose, fired once, and the man folded. Not dead, she could tell by the way he clutched, but done for the fight. Silence never lasted. The woods erupted again as 2 more guns woke together. Bark burst inches from her cheek. She tasted sap and grit and memory. Helmand was closer than the map said. She moved anyway, because stopping was what got people killed. When the grenade thunked from somewhere deeper in the trees, reflex lifted her voice before thought. Down! The round impacted short, a concussive slap that rattled ribs and showered earth. The next would be corrected. She didn't wait. She sprinted at the closest muzzle, the world narrowing to a man, a barrel, a heartbeat. His sights rose to meet her, too slow. She cut inside, the rifle becoming lever and baton, smashed the stock into his jaw, and swept his legs. He hit hard. She pivoted, fired over his shoulder to throw off his partner's aim, then drove her elbow into the downed man's throat to keep him honest. Ghost 7 engaging, she keyed into the fallen radio on his chest, letting the old call sign ring like a bell through Drake's net. You wanted a confirmation, here I am. For a priceless second, fire slackened. The frequency filled with short, ragged breaths and a single incredulous whisper. Negative. Ghost 7 is K. Hannah's reply was dry as dust and twice as cutting. Tell your boss ghost don't stay buried." A silhouette broke from the far tree line, aiming not at her but at the gully where Mia sheltered. Hannah didn't aim so much as decide the round cracked, the contractor spun, and the opening closed. "Up! Shift right!" she called, shepherding the recruits with fire and voice, until their little knot of lives reached a crease in the ground that offered real cover. Mia met Hannah's eyes for a single charged beat fear there. Yes, but something fiercer blooming under it, trust. The gunfight tilted then, not because numbers changed, but because belief did. The contractors tried to press, but the tempo was gone. Hannah owned it now, giving ground where it cost them, and taking it where it bled them. She caught a stock to her bad shoulder, white fire ripping down her arm. She rolled with it, came up on a knee, dry, clicked, and flung the empty rifle into a face at arm's length, bone crunched. She snatched the man's sidearm mid-fall, turned, and fired 2 controlled shots into the dirt by a 4th shooter to drive him behind a stump. The answer that followed did not come from her gun. It came from the tree line in a disciplined rip that dropped 2 men almost in the same breath. Voices shouted commands not taught at Paris Island. "Federal units don't move!" Daniel Cho stepped from the trees with operators fanning out, weapons already indexed, body language of men who made a living ending things cleanly. "Contractors on the ground. Drake, put your hands where I can see them." Colonel Nathan Drake did not obey. He ran. He bolted with the jerky disbelief of a man who had never pictured himself reduced to flight, branches clawing his immaculate uniform as if the woods themselves rejected him. He got 10 yards. Hannah cut across his angle, hips low, and speared him into the earth with the economy of a practiced takedown. His breath left in a grunt, dirt filled his mouth. She pinned him with a knee between the shoulder blades, the muzzle of the captured sidearm resting at the base of his skull, not pressed, not shaking, simply present. "You sold 15 lives," she said, not loud, not theatrical, just fact, and he flinched harder than if she'd shouted. Cho's team closed, securing weapons, zip-tying hands, clearing sectors with the rhythm of professionals. "Colonel Nathan Drake," Cho announced, voice level for the body cams in the future courtroom, "you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and the facilitation of multiple combat deaths." Drake tried to twist, teeth flashing with a last rabid defiance. "You think you can bury the truth? You think she—" The word "she" soured on his tongue as Hannah rose enough for him to see her face. Mud and blood streaked her skin, but her eyes were bright and terribly alive. The torn sleeve pulled back when she holstered the pistol, and the tattoo that had slept for 3 years woke in the gray light, the phoenix rising, feathered flames etched in fine lines, the Roman numeral 7 woven into the tail, as if the fire itself had counted her. A ripple moved through the clearing as the remaining instructors and the recruits who had followed the gunfire finally saw what the fight had already proven. Tank Lowell's jaw went slack. Marco Velez's bravado collapsed like wet paper. Mia Santos stood, breath-hitching, not from fear but from relief that named itself out loud. "Sergeant," she whispered, and the word hung true. A helicopter's rotors stitched the sky into pounding circles, washing the grove with wind. Brigadier General Walter Briggs stepped out under the downdraft, hat pinned to his head by muscle and habit, gaze sweeping carnage, prisoners, and a colonel face down in rope and shame. He stopped when he reached Hannah, his features shifting in increments as recognition fought the official record. There are salutes that are reflex. His was not. He lifted his hand with the deliberation reserved for funerals and heroes. "Sergeant Hannah Cole," he said, voice pitched to carry without effort. "Ghost 7, I briefed your memorial." She returned the gesture left-handed, the right a throbbing promise to ache later. "Sir." No flourish, no speech. Cho produced a battered recorder from an evidence bag, the one Hannah had kept like a talisman, and pressed play. The clearing heard Drake's voice twice, once today, hungry for confirmation, and once from a desert frequency 3 autumns old, cool as a wire transfer, as he certified 15 dead for cash. No one applauded, because some truths don't ask for noise. Riker tried to fade into the background. Operators didn't let him. Zip ties whispered again. Tank swallowed whatever apology had climbed her throat. Marco stared at his hands as if they were strangers he could no longer defend. Mia stepped closer to Hannah with the unsure bravery of someone choosing a path. "You stayed," she said, almost accusing, almost proud. Hannah's answer carried no triumph, only the gravity of a burden finally shared. Long enough to change how this place makes Marines, Drake found breath to choke one last thread about networks and tables and futures that had no room for honor. Hannah didn't bother to look down. "The future belongs to whoever keeps faith," she said, and Briggs nodded once, as if an old lesson had been restored to its rightful place. The phoenix on her shoulder caught a stray blade of sun and burned. Somewhere far from the Carolina pines, a different bird, the one called Six, waited in a country made of dust and echoes. But that reckoning would come later. For now, there were recruits to gather, wounds to bind, statements to take, a culture to repair. The ghost had stepped into daylight, and daylight had work. By the time the sun rose over Paris Island, the training field looked nothing like a battlefield, and nothing like the place it had been the day before. Yellow tape wound through the trees. MPs moved methodically among shell casings and trampled leaves. Cameras captured angles for the endless chain of reports to come. Hannah stood beside an ambulance, her right arm bound in a temporary sling, mud drying into patterns that felt like a map she'd already memorized. Every breath came easier now, though the air still smelled of cordite and pine sap. The recruits sat in stunned clusters near the mess hall, whispering about ghosts and justice, each retelling gentler than the truth. Daniel Cho handed her a water bottle, his own face gray with exhaustion. "You could have died," he said flatly. "Would have made the case neater," she answered, taking a long swallow. "Dead heroes sell faster than living ones." He didn't smile. "I'll take messy and alive." In the distance, General Briggs spoke into a secure phone, posture taut, the sound of responsibility. Helicopters ferried prisoners toward Charleston. Colonel Drake had been flown out first, head down, wrists bound, his once impeccable boots streaked with the same mud as the people he'd tried to bury. No one saluted when the blades lifted him away. The air that followed was strangely hollow, like the pause after thunder. Later, in the debrief tent, Briggs faced Hannah across a folding table littered with files and untouched coffee. "We've confirmed the recordings," he said. "Your operation just dismantled a network we've chased for years. 13 arrests so far, and more coming. You did good work, Sergeant." Hannah stared at her hands, at the faint tremor that still lived there. "It wasn't work, sir. It was unfinished business." Briggs nodded slowly. "Still, the Corps owes you an apology and a choice. Delta wants you back. So does intelligence. Or you can take a pension, vanish, start over." She looked up, eyes steady. "Start over where, sir? I already tried being dead." "Didn't take." The general almost smiled. "Then what?" "Here," she said simply. "This place taught cruelty like it was a weapon. Maybe it's time someone taught the cost." Briggs studied her for a moment, then extended a hand across the table. "You've got command support. Write the program. We'll pilot it here first." She shook his hand, and for the first time since Helmand, she felt the grip of trust not as risk but as weight shared. By afternoon, the barracks buzzed again, but the energy had changed. Tank Lowell stood near the flagpole, arm in a sling, talking quietly with Marco Velez. Neither looked proud. When Hannah passed, Tank straightened. "Ma'am Sergeant," she corrected herself, voice rough. "We were wrong. I was worse." Hannah met her eyes. "Then don't be again." Tank nodded once, the kind of nod that seals a promise. Marco stepped forward, awkward. "For what it's worth, thank you for not letting us die stupid." Hannah's reply was measured. "You're still here. Don't waste it." Evening brought quiet, the kind that feels earned, not given. The sky over the coast turned the color of faded copper. Hannah walked the perimeter road alone until she reached the old obstacle course, its walls stained with years of sweat and bravado. She stopped by the rope tower where she had fallen and almost broken everything again. Her shoulder ached in sympathy, but she touched the wood with her left hand, almost gently. The ghosts that lived here weren't cruel anymore, they were witnesses. Mia found her there, carrying 2 mugs of coffee that smelled like burnt hope and caffeine. "They're talking about naming a new ethics module after you," she said, handing one over. Hannah laughed softly, a sound without mirth. "That'll go well on a t-shirt." "It means something," Mia insisted. "People saw what you did," Hannah sipped, staring at the horizon. "Seeing isn't the same as learning." "Then keep teaching," Mia said, and left her to the silence that followed. Night settled. The Atlantic wind brought salt and a low hum from distant ships. Somewhere, the base chapel bell marked the hour, slow and solemn. Hannah sat on a bench near the barracks, notebook open on her lap. She began to write notes for training reforms, lists of behavioral triggers, outlines of mentorship programs. Between the bullet points she slipped names: Kowalski, Evans, Ruiz, Tran, and 12 others. 15 ghosts who would no longer be footnotes in someone else's profit. When she finished, she closed the notebook and pressed her palm against the cover, a quiet benediction. Cho approached out of the darkness, jacket unzipped, expression half relief, half fatigue. "Paperwork mountain starts tomorrow," he said. "You sure you don't want to run?" "I've done enough running," she replied. He sat beside her, watching the rows of lights stretching across the island. "They'll put up statues someday. Call it the Phoenix Protocol. You'll hate it." "Probably," Hannah said. "Statues don't bleed. People forget that." He hesitated, then asked, "What happens when the next ghost shows up?" She looked toward the sea, where the horizon met night without edges. "Then I'll remember what this feels like breathing after fire, and I'll try to help them breathe too." The base loudspeaker crackled, calling final lights out. Somewhere, recruits still whispered about the woman who had come back from the dead, the one with the tattoo that glowed like truth. Hannah rose, slinging her notebook under her arm. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the scent of salt and oil and second chances. "Ghost 7, Cho murmured as she started toward the barracks. She paused, half turning. "No," she said, voice low but sure. "Just Hannah Cole." Then she kept walking, the night closing behind her like a door that no longer needed to lock. Arlington in autumn carried a hush that even traffic could not break, the kind of quiet that belongs to folded flags and names carved in white. Hannah walked the neat rows with measured steps, dress uniform sitting right on a body that still ached in hidden places, sling traded for a tight wrap that allowed formality. 15 headstones waited, the geometry of loss lined to the horizon. She set a small phoenix pin at each base, a ritual both private and stubborn, speaking their names under her breath as if attendance still mattered. "All accounts paid," she told the air, not triumphant, not absolved, simply finished with one ledger. Daniel Cho waited a respectful distance away until she nodded him closer. He held an envelope that looked older than the week's events, corners softened, paper yellowing as if it had been carried too many miles in too many pockets. "Found in Drake's desk," he said. "False bottom. Addressed to you by a name that shouldn't exist." Her fingertips hesitated for a heartbeat on the flap, then slid under. Inside, a single photo and a short letter. The photograph showed a safe house that could have been anywhere from Kandahar to Kansas. Bare walls, scarred table, 2 men standing shoulder to shoulder. Drake younger by a few years, and the other with his face half turned. A posture she knew the way people know storms by smell. Ghost 6. Logan Pierce. The letter didn't waste ink. 7 if you're reading. The game went wrong for him and right for you. It isn't over. The phoenix is not the only bird that rises. When you want the whole truth, come where it began. 6. The paper crackled as she folded it again. Cho watched her as if confirming a calculation already done. "Could be bait," he said. "Could be worse than bait," she answered. It could be true. They stood between rows of headstones, wind-lifting leaves in small spirals. "Helmand," she said, and the word carried years. "Fob rattlesnake. He'd pick it for poetry alone. We can pull satellite, local contacts, whatever's left of Allied watchers," Cho offered. "Or we can ignore it, write a report that says the secondary threat vector is unsubstantiated and live to die old." The corner of her mouth twitched. "You don't strike me as the ignore it type." "I'm not," he admitted. "I also like to keep my people breathing." "I am not your people," she said gently, then softened it. "But I hear you." On the way back to Paris Island, bureaucracy began to assemble around them like scaffolding. Briefings, lists, call trees, careful language for committees that would want timelines and comfort. Briggs signed off on an overseas movement request with the impatience of a man who valued decisiveness more than perfect certainty, then added a line that made the paper heavier. "Provisional authority for on-site judgment. Trust, Sergeant," he said at the end, as if returning an item that belonged to her. She spent the evening in an office that had once held Riker's trophies, replacing shadow-boxed arrogance with a whiteboard grid modules for ethics, drills for de-escalation, peer mentorship rotations, meditation at 0500 that would get her laughed at until it didn't. Mia stopped by with a stack of printouts on cognitive load and stress inoculation, cheeks pink with the audacity of research. "Use it," Hannah said, meaning the work and the bravery, and Mia left grinning like someone who had decided what kind of leader she wanted to be. Tank came later, carrying a book on military ethics with 3 sticky notes peeking out. She didn't speak. She just set it down and looked Hannah in the eye long enough to make a promise without words. After taps, the base went quiet, the kind of quiet that pretends to be peace. Hannah sat at the corner desk and spread the photo and letter under a lamp whose light had the color of old whiskey. Logan Pierce had taught their team the geometry of entryways and the patience of Overwatch. He had been the one to call jokes into a dead radio to keep fear from building a nest. He had been the one the report said died in the first blast, the one whose dog tags had been found blackened and bent. She had believed it because believing gave shape to grief. Now grief turned and looked back. "If you're alive," she said to the photograph, "you ran for a reason, or you ran for a price." The flight east left Charleston under a sky that felt scrubbed clean. They sat far apart because protocol liked appearances, but silence traveled easily between rows. Cho worked a tablet full of maps and manifests, secure messages blinking like tiny metronomes. Hannah stared at nothing and everything, building and dismantling contingencies the way some people counted sheep. Somewhere over the Atlantic, fatigue finally slipped around her. Dream or memory, she couldn't say. The desert rose, a brightness that erased detail and left only heat, the taste of sand, the smell of burned oil and cordite, and the sound of a convoy that would never make its rendezvous. In the dream, a man turned just enough for light to graze the edge of his smile. Wakefulness came like a parachute opening. 2 hours, Cho said without looking up. "We'll hop through a partner airstrip, then ground to the old perimeter. We'll keep a footprint small enough to be a rumor." "Rumors travel faster than truth," she said. "Sometimes that's useful," he replied. "Sometimes it draws exactly the wrong attention." "We're counting on that." He finally met her eyes. "We?" "You volunteered," she said. "I remember." On descent, the land changed color by degrees until it matched the tone of memory. Heat pushed into the cabin when the door opened, the familiar dry hand of a place that remembered every footprint. They rode in a nondescript SUV that wore dust like a passport stamp, windows down because the air conditioner worked only when it chose mercy. The road cut through country that had swallowed armies and left behind only stories told at night. Hannah rolled the coin between her fingers, the Phoenix 7 challenge piece pulled from her boot, the metal warm now from skin and intention. The old FOB didn't look like anything anymore, a scatter of concrete bones and wire bitten down to snarls. The berm was a suggestion, the gate a memory. She stepped out and smelled time. Birds skittered from scrub, the only witnesses that didn't care. "You sure about this?" Cho asked, low. "No," she said, which was as close to yes as she ever gave the future. They walked the perimeter first, because habit kept you alive. She traced the ghost of a blast wall, knelt where a shipping container had once held spare parts and secrets, stood where the comms tent had thrown blue light on tired faces. At the center of what had been the ops pad, someone had arranged stones in the rough outline of a bird, wings outstretched, tail marked with 6 small slashes. Not a message left by chance. She didn't go closer. She looked up instead, at the earth-brown ridge that overlooked the pad. A figure stood there, still as a stake, hands empty and visible, face shaded by a scarf. The posture was the same as in the photograph, the weight carried on the same hip, the left knee locked from an injury she remembered complaining about after a long march. "Logan Pierce," she said to the heat. The name carried. The figure didn't move. Cho's hand hovered near his weapon without touching it. "Careful," he murmured. "Careful is how I lived long enough to get here," she said, then raised her voice. "You wrote to a dead woman." The figure finally shifted, a half-step that said welcome or warning or both. The voice that came down the ridge had the dry humor of a man who never surrendered the last word, even to fate. "Correction," he called. "I wrote to a woman who refused to stay dead." The wind lifted, hot and indifferent, carrying grit across the empty pad where plans had once been made and undone. Hannah studied the ridgeline, the angles, the escape routes, the way sunlight carved shadow from stone, and felt the steady rise of something that was not fear and not anger, but a colder kin, a readiness that belonged to reckonings. "Then let's talk," she said, and the old ground seemed to lean in to listen. Heat shimmered above the sand, a trembling veil that blurred the line between earth and sky. From the ridge, Logan Pierce descended with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who understood distance, how to use it, how to close it. Hannah watched every step, the rhythm, the limp that had once been a running joke in their team. The scarf fell back as he neared the wreck of the old FOB, revealing a face weathered by years and guilt, eyes the color of dust after rain. Cho moved to flank, weapon ready but low. Logan stopped 10 yards out, palms open. "If I wanted you dead," he said, "I'd have written a shorter invitation." "You wanted an audience," Hannah replied. "Congratulations, you have one." His smile carried exhaustion instead of charm. "You look good, Seven, for someone who's been eulogized twice." She didn't answer. The silence between them was the length of 3 funerals and a betrayal. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why run?" He exhaled through his nose, gaze flicking toward the skeletons of buildings that had once hummed with generators and fear. Because staying would have meant dying for the wrong people. Drake was small change. The buyout went higher than him. "You sold us," she said quietly, each word measured, no accusation in tone, just the fact itself. "You gave our routes to them," Logan's jaw flexed. "I gave them fake coordinates. Drake sold the real ones. I learned the difference when the convoy exploded. You think I didn't try to reach you? Communications were burned. I went dark to find the rest of the network." "And stayed dark for 3 years," Cho said, voice clipped. "That's some devotion to the cause." Logan's eyes narrowed. "You must be the babysitter. I'm the one who kept her alive while you wrote riddles." "She didn't need keeping," Logan said, looking at Hannah again. "She's the one who keeps the rest of us breathing, remember?" The ghosts of old conversations hovered in the dry air. Jokes from tents, bets unpaid, laughter that had ended under gunfire. "You're saying you went under?" Hannah asked. "You think the DIA will buy that?" "They already have," Logan said, and tossed a small black device that landed in the dirt between them. Cho bent, retrieved it, scanned with his field sensor. "Secure drive, encrypted but broadcasting a familiar signal." "What's on it?" "Evidence," Logan said. "The rest of the list. Drake wasn't alone. There are names that reach command levels you don't want to imagine." Hannah's fingers twitched toward the drive. "Why now?" "Because now they'll listen," he said simply. "A living ghost. 7 makes the story impossible to bury." She studied him, the heat lines shifting like lies between them. "You sent me a letter instead of coordinates." "Because I needed you to decide for yourself. If I'd sent data first, you'd have turned it over, and the ones above Drake would have scrubbed the trail before it cooled." He glanced at Cho. "You of all people should know how fast evidence disappears once it's logged." Cho didn't disagree. He watched Hannah instead, weighing her expression the way operatives read weather. "You believe him?" he asked. Hannah didn't answer. She moved closer, slow, closing the 10-yard gap until she could see the thin scar along Logan's jaw, a line she hadn't noticed before. "You could have called me," she said. "We had codes." "I thought you were dead," he said softly, "until the broadcast from Pendleton, until the tattoo." He half smiled. "You really leaned into the myth, didn't you?" "It leaned into me," she said. "I just stopped resisting." The wind changed direction, carrying a low hum. Cho's head lifted first, instincts ahead of thought. "Drone," he said. "Small recon, 1/2 mile, closing." Logan turned toward the sound. "They found me." "Define they," Hannah said. "The people who paid Drake. They want the drive. And me." "How many?" "Enough to erase this place twice." The hum deepened. Sunlight flashed off metal as a shape banked over the ridge. Cho cursed, slinging his rifle. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before company." "You brought them here," Hannah said to Logan. "No," he said, eyes scanning the horizon. "They never stopped following me." Dust plumes rose where the road bent toward the valley, 3 vehicles, light tactical, moving fast. Hannah's pulse steadied. The strange calm that always arrived right before history repeated itself. "You still good with distances?" she asked. Logan blinked once, understanding sliding into place. Always. She tossed him the drive. Then run interference. Cho, cover west. She dropped to one knee, scanning the terrain for choke points. The first vehicle crested the berm, silhouettes visible in the cab. Private contractors again, same insignia she'd seen on Drake's men Phoenix corrupted into a brand. Figures, she muttered. They steal everything, even symbols. Gunfire cracked, rounds sparking off stone. Logan returned fire from the ridge, precise old reflexes waking like muscle memory. Cho's controlled bursts stitched the flank. Hannah moved through the wrecked compound, using ruins as armor, counting targets by sound. The old FOB came alive for one more battle, ghosts trading places with the living. It lasted minutes, though it felt longer. The last vehicle burned quietly near the gate, heat making the air ripple above it. Logan limped back down, reloading with shaking hands. Cho checked the bodies with professional detachment. "You okay?" he asked Hannah. She wiped grit from her face. "Define okay." Logan held out the drive. "They'll keep coming. The data's safer with you." "You trust me now?" she asked. "I always did. I just couldn't prove it." He met her gaze. "You finish this, Hannah. End it. Burn the rest of the network. They called me 6 because I followed. You were always 7 because you finished." The wind carried smoke east toward a sun that refused to set. Cho pocketed the drive. "We can't transmit from here. Too much interference." "Then we move," she said. "There's an old comms bunker 3 clicks north. We'll send from there." Logan nodded. "And after that?" "After that," Hannah said, "you tell me everything you didn't write." He gave a small, crooked grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You won't like it." "I haven't liked much lately," she said. They started walking, 3 shadows stretching long over the dust, the wreckage of the past cooling behind them. Above, the drone spiraled once more before exploding mid-air self-destruct or mercy. No one could tell. Logan glanced up. "They don't want witnesses," he said. Hannah looked straight ahead. "Too late. We're already history." And somewhere, beneath the endless desert heat, the ghosts that refused to sleep turned over in their shallow graves, listening for the sound of the living trying again. They reached the bunker at dusk, when the desert turned the color of cooling metal and shadows became the only currency worth trusting. The structure had once been a comms hub, now half buried in sand, its antennas twisted like broken fingers pointing at a sky that no longer answered. Cho swept a light across the entrance, checking for tripwires, while Logan crouched beside the doorway, hand pressed against the steel, listening for what silence might hide. Hannah watched the horizon instead, measuring time by heartbeats and the fading drone of heat bugs. "Clear," Cho said, pushing the door open. The smell that came out was dust and old circuits, a scent both familiar and unwelcoming. Inside, the bunker felt preserved and violated at once, equipment stripped, but the walls still carried faint outlines where monitors and maps had hung. Hannah ran a palm along the concrete, tracing the ghosts of operations that had started here and ended in betrayal. They moved through the narrow corridor, flashlights cutting tunnels of white through darkness. In the operations room, Cho powered up an ancient terminal using a portable generator, its sputter sounding almost human. Static flickered, then life. "Satellite windows narrow," he said. "If we're sending the drive, now's our chance." Logan leaned against the table, arms crossed, eyes never still. "Encrypted packet, multiple recipients," he said. "One to Briggs, one to a watchdog journalist in D.C. Use redundancy. If one goes missing, the other screams loud." Cho smirked faintly. "You've been out here too long." "Long enough to know what silence costs," Logan replied. Hannah set the drive down beside the terminal, the tiny piece of metal suddenly too heavy for its size. "Once it's out," she said, "we can't take it back." "That's the point," Logan said. "Truth only works when it's louder than the lies." "Truth also paints a target," Cho countered. "Briggs can protect you, maybe even clear your name, but if the network's as deep as you say—" "It is," Logan interrupted. "You'll find uniformed saints laundering blood money through veteran charities, analysts selling routes like lottery numbers, senators taking cuts." Drake was middle management. The air seemed to contract around the words. Hannah met his gaze. "And you?" He looked away first. "I was an analyst too. Before the field, before the dust. I traced where the money went. I thought I could leak it, blow it open. They found out. I ran before they made me their next headline. Staying under was the only way to keep breathing. You could have come to me. You were dead, he said quietly, or close enough. The truth hit with the dull ache of inevitability. There were no heroes in this story, just survivors walking different sides of the same fire. The terminal beeped. Uplink ready, Cho said. Last chance to change our minds. No changes, Hannah said. She keyed the upload, watching the progress bar crawl upward. 30%, 50, 80. Outside, the wind began to rise, pushing sand through cracks in the door like whispers, too impatient to wait. 95. Then the screen flashed red. Transmission interrupted. Cho cursed under his breath. Signal jammed. How? Portable suppressor. Close. Logan grabbed his rifle, scanning the hallway. We've got company. The first shot punched through the bunker wall, a muffled thud that sent dust raining from the ceiling. Back door? Hannah asked. Collapsed, Cho said. We hold here. The next rounds came in bursts, aimed and disciplined. Whoever they were, they knew the layout. They followed the drone's feed, Logan said, voice flat. I should have destroyed it sooner. We'll discuss regrets later, Hannah answered, dropping behind an overturned desk. Cho returned fire, controlled pairs at muzzle flashes in the doorway. Sparks danced, smoke bloomed. 2, maybe 3, he muttered. Professional. Hannah felt the recoil steady her heartbeat. There was clarity in the noise, no committees, no headlines, just survival. She leaned out, fired twice, and saw a figure collapse in the corridor. A flashbang clattered in before she could move. Light exploded, white and deafening. The world tilted, sound collapsed into ringing. When she could see again, Logan was at the far wall, bleeding from his temple, and Cho was reloading by touch alone. You okay? She shouted. Define okay, he shot back. A voice echoed from the hall, distorted by distance and arrogance. Go 7, stand down. You can't win this one. She recognized the cadence American, educated, smug. Who am I talking to? She called. Someone who doesn't exist on paper, the voice said. Hand over the drive, and maybe you'll stay that way too. Tempting, she said, but I've had enough funerals. The answer was a hail of bullets that shredded the wall behind her. Cho jammed a spare grenade into her hand. Ventilation shaft, he said, nodding toward a narrow grate near the corner. We blow this and crawl out before they pin us. And the drive? Logan asked. We finished the upload. He limped back to the terminal, fingers flying over keys, rerouting signal paths. Satellite B-link. Manual encryption. Give me 60 seconds. The air filled with the scream of suppressed rounds ricocheting off steel. Hannah pulled the pin, tossed the grenade, and ducked. The blast punched open a hole big enough for a person. Sand poured in, hot and choking. Go, she yelled. Cho shoved Logan through first, then followed, dragging gear. Hannah covered their retreat, firing until the magazine clicked empty. She crawled into the shaft last, heat searing the metal, the smell of ozone and dust filling her lungs. Behind them, the terminal flashed once more before the screen went black. They emerged into twilight on the far side of the bunker, the desert wind fierce and alive. Logan coughed, wiped blood from his face. Did it send? Cho nodded, checking his handheld. Packet complete. Redundant upload confirmed. Then it's done, Hannah said. But even as she spoke, the desert answered with a low rumble vehicles again, not far. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but not out of choices. Logan handed her the empty rifle. We can't outrun them forever. We don't need forever, she said, just long enough for the truth to land. He gave a short, sharp laugh. Still the optimist. No, she said, just stubborn. Ho pointed toward the dark line of mountains cutting the horizon. There's an old airstrip 5 miles east. If Briggs got the signal, he'll send someone. Hannah nodded once. Then we walk. Oh. They started toward the ridge, silhouettes against the bruised sky, each step leaving small stories in the sand, 3 ghosts, 1 mission, no guarantees. Behind them, the bunker smoldered quietly, its last message riding invisible waves toward a world that would soon pretend surprise. The wind carried Hannah's voice forward, steady as a prayer. Truth's expensive, she said. Logan glanced at her. What's the price? She didn't look back. Everything. But it's paid in full. Oh. They walked through the night, guided by the faint shimmer of starlight that made the desert look like an ocean frozen in time. Every sound carried too far. Boots grinding gravel, the rasp of breath, the low whisper of wind that never truly stopped. The world had shrunk to motion and endurance. Cho led with the compass. Logan limped behind, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage at his temple. Hannah stayed between them, head turning every few steps, listening to the rhythm of pursuit. Somewhere behind, engines growled like predators circling in the dark. "They're closing," she said quietly. Cho didn't answer. There was nothing left to say about distance. It was arithmetic, written in sand and fuel. The mountains ahead offered the illusion of safety, jagged silhouettes that cut the moonlight into blades. 5 miles, Cho murmured, checking his GPS. Maybe less. "You think Briggs got the data?" Logan asked, voice hoarse. "He got it," Hannah said. "The question is what he'll do with it." The trail bent along an old riverbed long dry, a ribbon of pale dust that glowed faintly under the stars. A sudden flare streaked the sky behind them, illumination round, white as judgment. Shadows leapt across the sand. "Down!" Hannah barked, dragging them under the ridge. Bullets followed a heartbeat later, tracers carving brief constellations of death. The ground shook with impact. Cho returned fire, bursts controlled, disciplined. Logan joined in, teeth clenched against pain. They couldn't win, not by numbers. "They're flushing us out," Cho shouted over the gunfire. "We move now, or we die here." "Then move," Hannah said. They sprinted along the wadi, slipping, stumbling, the air alive with heat and noise. A bullet grazed her arm, hot sting more insult than wound. Another struck stone, showering her face with grit. She felt time stretch each breath its own century. When they reached the next rise, Cho threw himself flat, panting. 2 trucks, heavy guns. He squinted through the scope. "They're spreading to cut us off." Hannah scanned the slope. "They want the drive. They'll kill us anyway," Logan muttered. "Tie up loose ends." She touched the side of her neck where the phoenix tattoo hid beneath cloth. "Then we stop being loose ends," Cho frowned. "You have a plan?" "Always," she said, pulling a small remote from her pocket, the detonator for the charges she'd placed earlier in the bunker, insurance against betrayal. "We lead them in, then erase the evidence." "You'd burn everything?" "Ghosts don't need monuments," she said. They waited until the trucks rolled closer, light spearing through the dark. The desert air vibrated with the whine of engines and the mechanical certainty of men who believed in overwhelming force. When the first vehicle hit the mark, Hannah pressed the switch. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the earth lifted itself in anger. Fire bloomed behind them, red and violent, the shockwaves slamming through their bodies like a giant's heartbeat. One truck flipped end over end, landing in a fountain of sand. The second veered, tires shredding. Screams carried on the wind. "That's our cue," she said, rising. They ran again, lungs burning. The mountains grew closer, the sky turning from black to the gray of near dawn. Logan stumbled, but refused to stop. "Go," he gasped. "I'll slow you down. You'll live slower if we leave you," Hannah shot back, gripping his arm. Cho covered them, his last magazine nearly spent. "2 more coming over the ridge," he warned. "They don't quit." "Neither do we," Hannah said. She aimed, squeezed twice, 2 shadows fell. Silence returned, fragile and temporary. When they finally crested the ridge, the desert fell away to a wide plateau where broken tarmac glimmered the old airstrip, skeletal hangars collapsed like folded wings. Beyond it, a faint glint of movement headlights, low and fast, approaching from the east. "Please tell me that's Briggs," Logan said. Cho lifted his binoculars. "Military pattern. Probably. 90%. The other 10? Mercenaries with a budget." Hannah took the risk. "We hold until they show ID." They made their stand at the edge of the runway, the 3 of them framed by dawn's first fire. Engines echoed across the plain. The lead vehicle braked hard, dust spiraling around it. Men spilled out uniforms, insignia, familiar restraint. Briggs emerged behind them, wind flattening his jacket. Relief felt like disbelief given shape. "You always did make an entrance," he called. Hannah lowered her weapon, shoulders sagging. "You took your time. Traffic," he said, then looked past her at the smoke columns in the distance. I assume that's your doing. Collateral justice, she replied. Medics rushed forward, guiding them toward the convoy. Logan resisted until Hannah nodded. It's over, she said, though even she didn't believe it completely. Briggs approached, eyes flicking from her to Cho to Logan. The upload went through. The entire network's being pulled apart as we speak. Washington's already spinning it as a rogue cell. And you? She asked. I call it a reckoning. He hesitated. They'll want you debriefed in D.C., maybe a medal, maybe an apology. She shook her head. I'm done being a ghost for committees. Briggs studied her for a moment. You're not finished, Sergeant. You're just out of pages. He turned to Logan. You should have stayed dead. Logan's smile was thin. Working on it. You'll face questioning, Briggs said. You'll answer for the people who died. So will the ones who paid for them, Logan replied. As the sun cleared the horizon, painting the desert gold, Hannah looked back toward the distant smoke rising from the bunker, the place where so many lies had finally burned clean. Cho touched her shoulder. You did it, he said. She shook her head. We survived it. That's different. The convoy engines roared to life, carrying them east toward an airbase that would smell of fuel and coffee and paperwork. The sound of rotors returned, washing over the plateau like waves against rock. Hannah closed her eyes for a moment, hearing not machines but the quieter sound beneath the collective breath of people who'd refused to vanish, who had paid in silence and fire to make truth audible again. She opened them to the rising Sunday. Ghosts don't haunt forever, she said. No, Cho agreed. They teach the living how to stand. Ahead, the road cut through the desert like a scar, and in the reflection of the convoy's windshield, Hannah caught the faint shimmer of her tattoo, a phoenix burning quietly beneath the fabric, reminder and promise both. The sound of reckoning faded behind them, but its echo stayed steady, alive, unafraid. Washington smelled of rain and exhaustion, of briefings that never ended and cameras that always found the wrong faces. Hannah Cole sat in a windowless conference room beneath the Pentagon, the same room where once, years ago, she had been declared dead by committee. Now she was alive by paperwork, which somehow felt less certain. Cho sat 2 seats down, still bandaged, still watchful. Logan Pierce occupied the far corner, his wrists cuffed lightly to the table, his expression equal parts resignation and mischief. Across from them, General Briggs and 3 men in suits arranged their files with the reverence of people who mistook order for control. Operation Silent Thunder, one of the suits began, is officially declassified. The press release will credit Sergeant First Class Hannah Cole and Sergeant Daniel Cho with uncovering internal corruption within the armed forces. Mr. Pierce's role will remain sealed under national security exemptions. Hannah's voice cut through before the man could finish. Translation: the dead stay dead. No one contradicted her. Briggs leaned forward. You've done more than anyone had the right to expect. The system's shaken, but it'll recover. Recover to what? She asked. A cleaner lie? Cho gave her a small, warning glance, but she didn't stop. We lost 15 good operators because people forgot what service meant. You can't redact that with policy. Briggs's gaze softened. We can honor them, and we will. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, commendations, reinstatement options, even a proposal for a new training directive, the Phoenix Protocol. Hannah turned the pages slowly. The words felt heavier than metals. Teaching recruits not just how to fight, Briggs said, but why. Integrity, empathy, accountability, real leadership training, based on what you built at Pendleton. Congress loves the name. Of course they do, she murmured. Phoenix sells better than truth. Then sell it, he said quietly. Make it mean something. Afterward, she stepped outside into the gray morning. The city moved as if nothing had happened, commuters with coffee, guards with rifles, the ordinary miracle of ignorance. Cho joined her by the steps, hands in pockets. You could have stayed silent in there, he said. They would have written you a clean legend. I've had enough legends, she replied. I'd rather build something that outlives headlines. You already did. He hesitated, then added. You know they'll try to bury Logan. He knew that when he walked in, she said. Truth has no witnesses, only consequences. Down the street, press vans waited behind barricades. Reporters craned for a glimpse, microphones raised like weapons. Hannah and Cho walked past them, ignoring shouted questions. Are you the ghost? Did you really die? Who betrayed you? None of it mattered anymore. The truth had escaped. It would live its own life now. Later, in a quiet wing of Walter Reed, she visited Logan. The room smelled of antiseptic and unfinished stories. He looked smaller without the desert around him, younger somehow, or maybe just emptied. You should have run, she said. I'm tired of running, he replied. They'll keep you here? For now. Interrogations, debriefs, the usual purgatory. He smiled faintly. Tell me you're taking the job. Maybe, she said. If it means teaching them what not to become, then it's worth it. He reached for her hand, the cuff chain clinking softly. You know, I meant what I said out there. You finish things. That's who you are. She squeezed his hand once, then let go. Finishing's overrated. Sometimes you just start again. Outside the hospital, the world was new again. The air tasted of wet concrete and distant ocean, and the horizon glowed faintly orange where dawn pushed against cloud. Briggs had arranged transport back to Pendleton, but she delayed it, walking instead through the streets until noise and memory blurred together. Every step took her further from the ghost she had been and closer to the person she hadn't met yet. 2 weeks later, back at the training field, recruits stood in formation under a sky so blue it looked like a promise. Hannah wore instructor fatigues now, insignia restored, authority reclaimed. She faced the line Tank, Mia, Lance, and 40 others who had learned the hard way that cruelty had no valor. The Phoenix Protocol begins today, she said, voice carrying over the parade ground. You'll learn the art of restraint, the weight of empathy, and the discipline of conscience. You'll fail. That's fine. You'll learn again. That's how honor is built. She paused, scanning their faces. You'll ask why we do this. Because strength without mercy becomes tyranny. Because silence costs lives. Because ghosts don't stay buried forever, they rise to remind the living what truth sounds like. Mia raised a hand. Sergeant, do you ever sleep now? The recruits chuckled nervously. Hannah smiled, small and real. Not much, she said. Ghosts don't sleep, they stand watch. Laughter followed, light but sincere. Somewhere behind her, the flag rippled in the ocean wind, its fabric catching sunlight like fire. That night, when the base quieted and the ocean began its endless rhythm, Hannah sat alone at her desk, writing her final report. The last line read, Justice is not about revenge, it's about remembrance. She closed the file, sealed it, and leaned back. The scar beneath her sleeve itched faintly, the tattoo warm against skin, a phoenix, wings spread, feathers marked with 7. Not a brand anymore, but a vow. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Cho. Mission concluded. Truth confirmed. Rest, ghost. She typed a single reply before turning the device face down. No ghosts here. Only beginnings. Outside, the night deepened, and the Pacific whispered through the palms. Somewhere, across the world, remnants of the burned network were being hunted, interrogated, erased. But that was another story. For now, Paris Island slept, and the woman once known as Ghost 7 finally let herself breathe without armor. The last line of her own reflection came unspoken but clear. Some wars end with silence. The rest end when someone chooses to speak. And above the base, the dawn broke again, red, gold, relentless, the color of a bird reborn from fire, flying toward a sky that had finally learned her name. She walked into fire, and came out as something else. Not a soldier, not a ghost. A reckoning born from silence, forged in truth. When betrayal burned the world to ash, she learned that justice isn't about vengeance. It's about remembering the names they tried to erase. Some wars end with bullets. Hers ended with truth, and that was louder than any gunfire.